Today we will talk about the Trojan War, also known as the Crusade of 1204. Last time, I spoke about the time of Christ. According to the new chronology, this is the second half of the 12th century. Jesus Christ spent 3 years as an emperor in Tsargrad, after which a rebellion was raised against him, and he was executed, essentially renouncing the struggle for the throne. He attempted to flee to Russia, but a storm arose, and his ship was washed back to the shore. And as written in the Gospel, Judas betrayed him. Christ was seized and crucified. In Tsargrad, other people, referred to in church tradition and sacred scripture as Satan, came to power. According to Byzantine history, this was the Angelos family. All of them were relatives. All the people who ruled in Tsargrad were related. However, after this event, the royal family split into two parts: the Christian part and the anti-Christian part. And after some time, war began. The Christians who sided with Christ were the apostles, disciples of Christ, primarily the Apostle Paul, as well as representatives of the nobility and the royal family. They gathered their forces, marched on Tsargrad, took it by assault, and defeated it. It was a very significant event. Here on the screen, I have presented datings of Egyptian and European zodiacs. It is clearly seen that the Egyptian zodiacs end around the year 1400. Dates with dark circles represent unequivocal datings, while dates with empty circles have several options, and they are indicated multiple times. It is evident that the era of monumental or royal zodiacs ends around 1400. There are still some in the 18th and 19th centuries, but these are individual coffins and some tombs on the periphery. These are not royal tombs. These are not temples. The monumental part of the zodiacs comes to an end. And then, after some time, European zodiacs begin. Even from this picture, it can be seen that this ancient tradition has some kind of a gap, and then it jumps from Egypt to Europe. The zodiacs themselves change their appearance. In Europe, they look different. But nevertheless, the tradition remained the same. Here, I emphasized the zodiac related to the year 1206. It is the zodiac of Pharaoh Seti, who is most likely the same Satan described in the sacred scriptures. I'll provide a few more formal results. This is a connection matrix of Roman emperors. I will enlarge it. I apologize, these are Byzantine emperors, not Roman. Look, here too, you can see that there is a triangle until 1200. This is a connected chronicle. It is precisely the chronicle related to the rule of the royal dynasty before Christ. And then there is a gap. You see, a gap, and then it is restored somewhere in the middle of the 13th century. This is a duplicate. It's heavily duplicated. These are Byzantine emperors, and here are Roman emperors. The same picture. Until 1200, there is one chronicle, and then it is another. And from around 1300, a more filled chronicle begins. But from 1200 to 1300, it has a different character of behavior. It is a stitched chronicle. Something happened abruptly. The names of rulers began to behave differently. This always happens at the joints of different chronicles, joints of eras. These are Roman emperors. Now I will give another example. These are the joint names of rulers of Byzantium, Russia, and the Ottomans. We see that the year 1200 is not so pronounced here, but nevertheless, it is visible. This triangle starts from the year 1200, and before that, there is some other chronicle. Purely formal calculations in chronology show that something significant happened in the year 1200. Some major event occurred that overall changed history. Some era ended, and a new era began. According to the new chronology, indeed, a new era began. Specifically, after Christ was crucified, the part of the royal family that sided with him, the Christian faction, including the apostles, started a war against the faction that seized power, killed Christ, and ruled in Tsargrad. One of them was buried in the year 1206. Most likely, he is considered Satan in church tradition. And in Egypt, this name is Seti, which is the same as Satan. There were emperors and pharaohs with this name. Going ahead, I will show you his picture. This is Pharaoh Seti I, who has a magnificent and enormous tomb in the Valley of the Kings. By the way, it's not accessible. We had quite a hard time getting there. Here is his mummy, and this is his face. Now, the Trojan War, also known as the Crusade. According to the new chronology, the Trojan War and the Crusade are one and the same. It was after the Trojan War that Aeneas fled from burning Troy and founded Rome. This is how it happened, according to the new chronology. Let's discuss the Trojan War. According to the new chronology, what is the Trojan War? It is the Crusade of 1204. What is the Crusade of 1204? According to the new chronology, it is a campaign of combined forces gathered in the provinces of the empire, primarily in Russia. By that time, the empire had already expanded along the coasts of the Mediterranean and Black Seas and along the rivers flowing into these seas. At that time, Russia was already populated. It was a province of the empire. Christ spent his youth in Russia. That is, there were people who considered themselves Christians, knew him, and were outraged by the events in Tsargrad. Christ wanted to go to Russia before they captured him. So, he had many supporters there and in other places as well. These were the combined forces of the Crusaders. In the Trojan War version, they were Greeks. In Troy, in Tsargrad, the Trojans were situated. The Greeks, also known as Crusaders, approached the walls of Troy, also known as Tsargrad, and tried for a long time to capture this city. Last time, I showed you how Yeras was designed. It is indeed a very, very strong fortress, practically impregnable. No wonder the besiegers stood around it for a long time. Eventually, they took it with the help of the Trojan horse. There are various fantastic images of what the Trojan horse looked like and how they dragged it through the wall. If you remember, the Trojans were portrayed as foolish, not realizing the danger, and they themselves dragged this horse in, and inside were the attackers. According to the new chronology, it was actually the use of a siege tower. Of course, it was not a horse at all. You see, it has wheels, and it is being dragged. It was not a horse, it was a tower, and it was also put on wheels. It approached the wall, sometimes breaking through the wall from the tower, sometimes just throwing a bridge over. So, inside this tower, there were warriors. Just like inside the Trojan horse were Greeks planning to capture Troy. The siege tower was like a horse, a wooden structure inside of which attackers were located and which penetrated through the wall. I remind you that the Trojans even broke down the wall to drag in this horse. This is how these towers approximately looked. They were rolled up, and the city was taken. Then, in legends and myths, it transformed into a tale of a horse that supposedly the Trojans themselves brought into their city. And from there the Greeks jumped out and defeated them. This is an old altar dedicated to the Apostle Paul. In the center, there is the Apostle Paul with a large sword. He is always depicted with a sword. According to the new chronology, the Apostle Paul was one of the main ideologists of the Crusade. He did not participate in the crusade himself, he died. But according to the Gospels, if you remember, according to the Acts of the Apostles, the Apostle Paul was a warrior. He did not become a Christian right away, he was a warrior. He was the one who gathered these troops. In European chronicles, he has a name. They call him Folk of Noyile. He is always depicted with a sword, that's the rule. Today, of course, it is somehow interpreted, saying that he was beheaded with a sword. So that's why he is depicted with a sword. But in reality, it is not so. According to the new chronology, the sword of the Apostle Paul is a symbol that he gathered the crusade. The Christians went, took Tsargrad, but as often happens, they could not agree among themselves. Of course, they went with good intentions to avenge the death of Christ. They did avenge, but after that, the empire fell apart. That is, they could not agree among themselves. One part of them opposed another part. They could not find common ground. Who would be the leader, who would not? Disputes arose among them. The royal family scattered to different places, although all of them were already Christians. In other words, the Christians won. The forces of Satan were defeated. Only Christians remained, but these Christians immediately entered into a struggle among themselves. Among the Christians, there was a certain person. He is mentioned in the Gospels as the beloved disciple of Christ, whom Christ on the cross called the named Son of the Virgin Mary. He said, "Woman, behold thy son," and appointed the Virgin Mary as his named mother. This is a well-known passage from the Gospel of John. He was a supporter of Christ, a member of the royal family. In the legends of the Trojan War, he is depicted as Aeneas, the favorite of Venus. He was the beloved of the gods. In the pages of the Iliad, There is a depiction of a dispute between Aeneas and Achilles. They met on the battlefield. Aeneas defends Troy, as if defending the wrong side, while Achilles is a crusader attacking Troy. He is for Christ, and he is stronger. The Crusaders eventually won. Aeneas loses this duel, but the gods save him. Such is the history, in reality. It doesn't unfold as simply as it might seem. They came, conquered, established a new rule. No, history doesn't unfold that way. It's more complex. Aeneas was a Christian but fought on the side of Christ's opponents. It seems like a contradiction. But, in reality, there is no contradiction because Aeneas reasoned as a statesman. He believed that no matter how bad the rule was, coming, besieging the capital, even with good intentions to incite a revolt and overthrow the capital, to take it by storm, this is the wrong approach. Because any revolts, even with the best intentions, always end badly. As a sponsor of the law, Aeneas fought on the side of Satan, that is, on the side of the Trojans, against Christians, although he himself was a Christian. As a person who understood very well how power and the state were organized, he understood how one could change and how one could not change the orders existing in the state. He believed that the Crusaders were wrong, that it was not right to approach the walls of the city with weapons, that such issues needed to be resolved differently. In that sense, he turned out to be correct, because the Crusaders destroyed everything in the city, destroyed the empire, and it fell into turmoil for 100 years. In this sense, he understood everything correctly. But when the city was finally taken, he had to flee. As a person who fought on the side of the losers, he was forced to flee. And this story is vividly described, both in ancient history of the capture of Troy and in many other historical documents duplicating this event. It is described that he fled and founded Rome. Today, it is considered that Rome was in Italy. But in reality, he fled to Russia and precisely there, created the state that we know as the Russian state. Also known as ancient Rome, it is the same, and there are many other names for this ancient state. Ancient Syria, the first kingdom on earth. In history, there are many duplicates and various descriptions of this state created by Aeneas. Don't think that he created it peacefully. No, of course, he was summoned. He negotiated with the locals, but it was far from a peaceful establishment of the state. Aeneas even spoke words that to create a state, it is necessary to destroy entire swarms of stinging bees. Indeed, if we look at history, we see that any state is created by exterminating the nobility. After that, the remaining nobility obeys this new ruler. A state is not created by mere persuasion because there are different opinions, and no one will listen, especially during times of turmoil. Simply put, people in power, people with strength, will not form alliances among themselves. They will endlessly fight among themselves, and a state is not created in only a token way. And that's what happened. He went to Russia, he had his supporters there, and he created this great state, an empire, but not immediately. It was all very gradual. Because the empire fell apart, someone started ruling in Tsargrad, and several fragments of this empire emerged. In the Empire of Trebizond, in Trebizond itself, there were its rulers, in Epirus, in Antioch. The entire vicinity of the capital crumbled into many states. All these states were Christian states, all ruled by the same family and various representatives of the ancient imperial family. They all tried to defeat each other and restore the empire with themselves at the helm. In other words, everyone wanted to restore the empire, but everyone wanted to be the main one and defeat the others. This is the painting. Aeneas flees burning Troy. He carries his elderly father on his back, leads his son by the hand, and his wife Crusa is with him. In the new chronology, all this is explained. I won't go into details now. The main thing is the flight. He escaped and created Rome. In reality, he created Rome in Vladimir Suzdal, Russia, which is the true ancient Rome. Much later, after a complex development of events, also ruling individuals, disgruntled nobles, will end up in the Vatican, in Italy. And there they will paint a picture as if the Roman kingdom was located where they were. But this is already a propagandistic image. All these people fought for power. It is necessary to understand that there were peasants engaged in agriculture. There were merchants, and each had their own business. And there was this ancient family that dealt with power. They created states according to the same pattern, with a divine king at the helm. In those times, the king was deified, and they created such a state. It was like that during the time of Christ, and later in Russia at the beginning, it was the same. They created it according to the same pattern, and they saw their vocation in restoring world power. It was their work, their calling, the purpose of their lives. They fought for it, including among themselves. They didn't engage in any other business. They fought for power and believed that the strongest should win and establish this power. In other words, there was constant internal strife among them. Ideally, it was supposed to be a state that encompassed the entire world. That's what they aspired to. This family essentially created our civilization. It somehow emerged in the ancient empire, most likely in Egypt. We don't know how they appeared there. But the history that we see is already covered with the deeds of this family, which is depicted in the Holy Scriptures as the Holy Family. Jesus Christ belonged to it as well. According to ancient belief, they were all gods. Later, from Christ himself, came the understanding that humans are not gods. His disciples embraced this understanding and carried it through the Apostolic Church. Eventually, they triumphed and expelled these representatives of the royal Christian family. But this would be much later, around 160 years later. In the meantime, it's the beginning of the 13th century, the Trojan War, and the world is ruled by the royal family, but they are already all Christians. That is, they considered Christ their God. They acknowledged Christian holidays, but their attitude towards Christ was not like that of the apostolic Christians. They still had a more, let's say, brotherly relationship with Christ. He was a God, but their God, a member of their family. They too were gods, perhaps of a slightly lower level, as they thought. At least, they demanded that their images be placed in temples alongside Christ, and people prayed to them. Aeneas, of course, had similar beliefs. He was a royal Christian who knew how to create a state and fought for power to the last drop of his blood. They simply did nothing else. That was their calling. Here's another painting with Aeneas. Aeneas was the beloved of Venus. He was the darling of the gods. By the way, this is the first Russian painting on the theme of Russian history. Sviatoslav's return from the Danube. Pay attention. He is also dressed in exactly the same Roman attire. Those paintings on the theme of Russian history that we are accustomed to appeared after Karamzin. The artists started painting what we are used to after they had read Karamzin. But before they had read Karamzin, they painted Russian history like this. This is Russian history. This is how it seemed to people in the 17th and even the 18th century, and fragmentally in the beginning of the 19th century. Now I will discuss another topic. It's the famous biblical story of Jacob and his 12 sons, 12 patriarchs, 12 tribes of Israel. I'll remind you, there was such a patriarch, Isaac. He had 2 sons, Esau and Jacob. Esau sold his birthright to Jacob and then perished. According to the new chronology, this is the story of Christ's father. Patriarch Isaac is Isaac Komnenos, the earthly father of Christ. And his 2 children are Esau, actually Christ himself, and Jacob, to whom Christ Esau sold the birthright. He is the brother of the Lord, Jacob. He is known, he has an epistle. He is one of the apostles, one of the saints in the Christian church. He is also called James, brother of the Lord. According to the new chronology, after Christ's death, the birthright passed to his brother Jacob. Whether he was a full or half-brother, we cannot say for certain. But we can say for sure that he was his closest relative, to whom, according to later opinions reflected in the Holy Scriptures, the birthright passed, meaning the leadership in the family after Christ. Aeneas, who fled, is depicted in the Bible as one of the sons of Jacob, brother of the Lord. In the Bible, he is simply a patriarch, but according to the new chronology, he is Jacob, brother of the Lord. His son, Joseph the Beautiful, was hated by his brothers. If you remember, his other brothers hated him and expelled him, or rather, sold him into slavery. This story of how the brothers hated and expelled Joseph the Beautiful, selling him into slavery, is the story of Aeneas' flight. But what happened next? Joseph the Beautiful ends up in Egypt. In the Holy Scriptures, Egypt is often Russia. It's the same here. He goes to Egypt, and there, the Pharaoh hands over power over Egypt to Joseph. And then, when he already has power over Egypt, the Pharaoh makes him a ruler. In the Bible, it is not said that he hands him the royal crown, but in other sources, it is explicitly written and depicted that he obviously makes him king. After Joseph gains power over Egypt, He invites his father Jacob and his brothers who had mistreated him. This story is most likely how it really happened. That is, Aeneas, also known as Rurik, runs away from his brothers, from other members of the royal family, and ends up in Russia. There he creates a vast state. He is handed power. Indeed, Gostomyśl hands him power. Most likely, as written in Russian history, he marries a Russian princess and establishes the Russian royal dynasty. Then he invites his father Jacob and 11 brothers. Essentially, this is the migration of the nobility. That is, when he gained power in Russia, he invited the nobility to join him. And some part of the nobility moved to him. This is the 12 sons of Jacob. In the Bible, in the Holy Scriptures, they are portrayed as the 12 founders, the 12 tribes of Israel. This painting depicts that event. It's an icon, a mosaic, depicting how Patriarch Jacob blesses his 12 sons. It's a very famous passage in the Bible. This is a modern painted picture. Notice, by the way, they are portrayed differently. This is in a mosaic, and here a modern artist painted it. This is him giving the blessing. And this painting depicts how the brothers sold Joseph into slavery. These are modern images. They are, of course, funny, childlike, but nonetheless, to make it illustrative. This is how they portray the sacred history. Christ in rags, all these patriarchs look like some poor folks among camels. This is a modern perspective on sacred history, which is, of course, silly, because everything that happens in the desert among camels is immediately forgotten. In the scale of a vast state, it means nothing. The whole history that we know, sacred history, is a history of power. It is the history of people who are at the top of power. This particular history passes from generation to generation, turns into myths, legends, accumulates various events like a snowball, and transcends into eternity. Rural events never go beyond local traditions and have a short lifespan. This must be understood. Historians look at it completely differently. If you look at modern history, it looks different. Christ is portrayed as some beggar, vagabond walking around Jerusalem. We remember him, and the rulers all fade into the background. We don't remember them. Muhammad is also portrayed as some beggar wandering through the deserts, writing a book that everyone reads today, and that is a sacred book for Muslims. And where are the rulers of that time? We don't remember them. This is a completely incorrect picture. The tree is turned upside down by its roots. That's not how it works in history. That's what the new chronology talks about. In history, it doesn't work that way and never has. And this is a page from the Russian chronicler that describes the calling of Rurik. It describes it differently than we are used to reading about this calling in the tale of bygone years, in the forged chronicle of the 18th century, written in Kiev through distortions of the Russian chronicler. The man looked at the Russian chronicler and rewrote it. The result was, the tale of bygone years. We have already written in detail about this, and books on this topic will soon be published. And how, actually, was this story presented in Russian and Moscow sources? Here it is detailed that Gostomyśl was the ruler of Russia, a vast state. Siberia was already part of it. They had already occupied a vast territory. That is, Russia during the time of Christ is described as a huge state, including the entire western Siberia up to the Ob River. And in the west, it extends to the Danube and the Balkans, meaning huge territories were under their control. The ruler of this state was Gostomysl of Novgorod. Novgorod is Yaroslavl, according to the new chronology. The Russian ruler Gostomysl gathers his close associates before his death and says, "Oh, men and blood brothers, our country is vast, but we need a king, a representative of the royal family, who should rule such a country." He says that the country has already outgrown the limits in which it finds itself. Now it is ruled by princes, people from the same family, but some distant relatives of the royal family. And this country deserves to have a representative of the upper echelon of the royal family at its helm, who could enter into the struggle for power with others and make it the center of a world empire. It has already outgrown its original possibilities when it was just a province. He bequeaths to his relatives to call to the throne a man of royal blood and put him at the head of Russia. That's the legacy of Gostomysl. The Russian chronicler describes in detail that this is exactly what was done. They called Rurik, of royal blood, then married him to a Russian woman, then again, and again. In essence, the people who ruled Russia remained in power. It's not like he came and expelled them all. No, they remained in power. But if before they were just princes, occupying a certain level, now they became kings, and their level became completely different. And they began to gather the whole world under their rule. It was a very clever solution, and it's all described here. From this point, the history of the next empire with its metropolis in Russia begins. At the head of the state appeared a representative of the royal family, the upper echelon of the royal lineage. They entered into the struggle for power with the remaining fragments of this collapsed empire. Eventually, they gained this power. But it was preceded by almost 100 years of preparation. They didn't just rush into battle immediately. First, in the interfluve of the Oka and the Volga, they created a huge powerful state, forged a large amount of iron weapons, bred war horses, formed a completely new type of cavalry army, a horde with several horses per person, developed agriculture, cleared forests, created Russian fields where many crops were grown to feed this army. So, it wasn't just a sudden desire to conquer, jump on horses, and ride off, as historians today portray, for example, the Mongol conquest. Some Mongol bandit rode, brandished a saber, then gathered some more bandits, they went and conquered, then attracted some more bandits to their side, and so they went and conquered the whole world. It doesn't happen like that. A state always conquers. Behind any army, there must be a state. Without a rear, without a supply of food, without the production of a large amount of weapons, without the science behind it, without state builders behind that army, even the strongest army starts losing. Military and purely military activities by themselves have never created anything. Military activities have always been one of the aspects of state activity. Only then were they successful. Perhaps I'll skip this subject, it's a slightly different topic. I wanted to talk about the tomb of Christ and the Virgin. It's a separate topic, I'll probably skip it now. And I think that's where I'll finish. Because we're already running late, and you probably have some questions. So let me conclude here. And please, ask questions.
Gleb Vladimirovich, hello.
Hello.
Thank you so much to you and Anatoly Fomenko for your many years of work. Sincerely, your fan.
Very nice to hear.
Thank you sincerely, I'm an admirer. Your books have had a profound impact on me, and I believe on many others who read them. They make us think, connect with what's happening now. Thank you. I have a question. When I was reading one of your latest books, Phony Jerusalem, I constantly had associations with Chersonesus. The thing is, I grew up in Sevastopol, spent most of my life there, and I constantly had associations with Chersonesus. Many things you described in the book are similar. How Phony Jerusalem was created, what happened there. It's also a small territory, like a tiny spot, with a huge number of churches, some pantheons, colonnades, attributes of a sanctuary. It wasn't just a port through which goods were supplied to the Roman Empire, as modern history tells. Accordingly, my question is, how do you see Chersonesus today?
Absolutely correct. After all, Phony Jerusalem was not created from scratch. It is thoroughly described in our book. They destroyed the ancient sanctuary of the time of the royal Christianity and adapted it to the fake Jerusalem. So, naturally, you have such associations. Because Chersonesus and Cape Violent are the birthplace of Christ, and Sevastopol is not very far away. It's one of the main sanctuaries of the time of the royal Christianity, where there were numerous temples and sanctuaries dedicated to Christ, located not far from his birthplace. There was one of the wonders of the world, the Temple of Artemis, also known as the Temple of the Virgin. So, it's indeed one of the oldest places that was highly revered during the era of the royal Christianity. Therefore, of course, you saw the resemblance. It exists among all the monuments of the royal Christianity. Take Apamea in Syria, Palmyra. Not the part where the Temple of Baal is, which is more recent, but the old part. There are many of them. The same goes for Syracuse. They just chopped off a piece of Sicily. There was already some riverbed there, and they finished it. They just cut off a piece of the island of Sicily, where a sanctuary of the royal Christianity was arranged. The same theaters, amphitheaters, many other structures. You see, they conquered the world. Going ahead, I was talking about the collapse of the empire, about how they entered into the struggle. And one of the states was formed in Russia, the state of Aeneas Rurik, also known as the Roman Kingdom. But in the end, they conquered the world. They defeated all their rivals. They united the world under their rule. For about 50 years or even more, they had no worries, no opponents. The whole world was at their disposal. They set up a vast number of sanctuaries, traveled between them. Syracuse, Chersonesus, and elsewhere. I didn't get to tell you. One of the main sanctuaries was the tomb of Christ, the most grandiose structure of that time. Although there are no columns there, it is a grand structure. It's unique. It's now in the southeast of Turkey. It's called Mount Nemrut. Well, let me show it to you since we're already talking about it. So, you see, all these theaters and amphitheaters, they are huge, impressive sanctuaries. Impressive Egyptian temples. But they all exist in several copies. The same goes for pyramids. There is the Pyramid of Cheops, which is the largest, but if you go a bit away, there is the Red Pyramid, which is not much smaller than Cheops. Well, a little bit. The point is, if you build many pyramids, one of them will be the largest. The question is that the largest one is not much bigger than the previous one. You understand, right? That is, it's not like there's only one. Here is one construction that has no equals. Nowhere to be found. Not in pyramids, not in temples, not in anything. Not in amphitheaters, not in theaters. There is always, of course, something the largest. But there is always a little smaller. Not significantly. Not significantly different from the largest. But there is a construction that is the only one. This is the first tomb of Christ and the Virgin Mary in Abu Simbel. This is what they originally did back in the 13th century. It's a massive construction. Fantastic in size. There are two tombs side by side. However, they were at war with each other. And this tomb seemed insufficiently protected to them. Although it was difficult, but it could still be reached and robbed. So, they did something like this. This construction is truly unique. It's the only one. See the mountain range? I'm pointing with the mouse. And see that peak? It's kind of pointed? It's somewhat white. Let me zoom in. See, it's somewhat white. What was done? Now it's southeastern Turkey, but it used to be Syria. There was generally an Arabic-speaking population. It belonged to Egypt, to Syria. Mamluks ruled there before. It takes a very long time to climb this mountain. A road has been built there now. We drove there by car for about 2 hours, through completely wild places. Nobody lives there at all. Nothing is delivered there. There are some trees with huge eagle nests. It's absolutely wild. The entire top of the mountain was completely crushed into rubble and they built such a mound. The summit of the mountain is crushed into fist-sized rubble. And on the top of this mountain, they made a mound. This is an aerial shot, how it looks from an airplane. These paths are from people walking on it. One can walk on the rubble and make paths. What is the brilliance of this structure? It's in the fact that it's rubble. This is a cross-section of this sanctuary, a reconstruction by historians. So, they built a temple here. These seated figures are still there. There's a date, there's a zodiac. The dating is 1221, precisely the era of the struggle. They hadn't even finished the struggle yet. Therefore, one of the sides created such a sanctuary so that it couldn't be stolen. It's impossible to steal because it's rubble. It's millions of tons of rubble. In a pyramid, you can dig a passage and reach the heart of the pyramid. In rubble, you can't dig a passage. It collapses immediately. It's a brilliant idea, how to bury something in a way that makes it impossible to excavate. Even in our time, archaeologists tried to dig into it. In the first half of the 20th century, explosives were placed, and an explosion was carried out. Heads of all these statues flew off, everything fell. But this mound just crumbled a bit. It became slightly lower, and that's it. And it gathered back into a pyramid because that's how the laws of physics work. A pile of sand, a pile of rubble forms a certain shape according to the laws of physics. So, it just became lower. Even in our time, they couldn't reach anything. This is a Mamluk fortress guarding this structure. These are the heads that flew off. See the size of the heads. The faces are also very expressive. They are bearded, all wearing tall pointed caps. I would say that all these figures have Slavic faces. And here in the background is the mountain itself. Such a structure is unique. I mean, to create something like this, at such a height, at such a distance from everything living, with such scale, it was done only once. There's nothing similar anywhere. It's the only structure of its kind in the world.
What do you think? Are there artifacts or real bodies?
Well, I think that just to create something like this without putting anything inside is unlikely.
So, hypothetically, could we find the genes of Christ there?
Our assumption is that it's the tomb of Christ and the Virgin Mary. We have a whole book on this topic. But no one could reach it. Even with modern instruments, nothing can be seen there because all the rays scatter. The mountain can't be X-rayed. There is rubble, the facets are chaotically arranged. Any radiation directed there scatters. Everything is absolutely opaque. In the end, I want to say that they built a lot of everything. And this is like a pinnacle, it's unique. And since it's unique, it must be for something important. You see, if it were the tomb of a king's son would build for himself something similar or approximately the same. That's how it's always done. But this structure is unique. And our hypothesis is that it's connected with Christ and the Virgin Mary. There are numerous other structures. They look alike. In Chersonesus, there are ruins of one of them.
Could you please remind us of the name of the gravel mound and where it is located?
In Turkish, it's called Mount Nemrut. It's also known as the tomb of the king of Commagene. They believe that there was a king of a small local kingdom called Commagene. The king's name was Antiochus, and he arranged such a tomb for himself. A mound that no one in the world could replicate, not even close. Forget close, but by an order of magnitude. Local peasants got together and built it. That's what they wrote. Again, Mount Nemrut in Turkish, after the Assyrian king Nemrut. According to an old belief, King Nemrut is the founder of the first kingdom on earth. It's in southeastern Turkey. The nearest town is Adıyaman. It's a small town. There's nothing major nearby. These are absolutely uninhabited places.
Zakhar Vladimirev asks why there is no Emperor Andronikos in the dynastic parallelisms from the Byzantine Empire, even in the old books from the 1990s.
Well, so what, that he's not there? We haven't conducted a complete study of Byzantine history through dynastic parallelisms. Byzantine history has been studied in broad strokes, at least not in such detail. When we discovered the parallelism with Christ, we started with dating. We first dated the era of Christ, and then looked at what Byzantine chronicles wrote on this subject. And then we discovered Andronikos. Well, we haven't done everything. You understand, it's a huge task. There's still a lot to be done. Do you think we've analyzed every word of Byzantine history to the last detail? No. By the way, we're working on it now. We are studying Byzantine chronicles again, returning to them, and we will study all of this in more detail. There are quite large passages in Byzantine history, large bodies of texts that have not yet been studied by us. And not all possible dynastic parallelisms have been found either.
Sergei Kerchinsky asks how you resist actions against pseudoscience?
It's somehow far from us. We don't resist anyone. We have our own work, and we don't oppose anyone. If someone wants to counteract, that's fine. We believe that people are adults and should figure things out for themselves. What kind of guardianship is that? I'll go and tell everyone not to fall for this bait, not to be deceived. If a person is willing to be deceived, they will be deceived. It's impossible to help them. If you run around trying to find someone who has been deceived to tell them and save them from deception, then perhaps this person has nothing else to do. They have no work of their own.
Experience shows that it's impossible to save people from deception.
Yes. That's why I say that apparently this person simply has nothing else to do if they're engaged in that. That's why we never engage in such things and believe that a true scientist will not engage in countering some pseudoscience. A true scientist will be engaged in science. They will do their work rather than criticize others.
Sergei Kerchotsky asks what was meant by the concept of baptism during the time when Andronikos was in Russia, before his imperial times.
I recommend reading the book, The Gospel in the New Translation published by the World Union of Old Believers. From there, it becomes clear that the word baptism carried the meaning of sacred washing. It is used in this sense directly in the Gospel. So, if you read the Gospels as they are written, not as in the synodal translation where everything is murky and incomprehensible, and they even change words. Most people don't read in Old Slavic. What makes this book valuable is that what is written in Old Slavic is conveyed in the Russian language. A person can understand what is written in the Gospels that our ancestors read. They read certain Gospels. Today, there is access to them, and anyone who knows Russian can read them. Then you won't have the question of what baptism is. It is written about in the Gospels. The rite of baptism is a rite of sacred washing from the time of Christ. It existed even before Christ. It is written about this there, not in detail, but quite clearly.
Another question from Zakhar Vladimirov. In your opinion, which state remained loyal to the empire the longest during the Reformation era?
Firstly, during the Reformation era, there were no separate states. The Reformation era is the 16th century, and the empire had not yet collapsed. Therefore, it is not appropriate to talk about states remaining loyal during that period. If you are referring to the 17th century, after the empire had already collapsed, then you can ask this question about which state remained loyal the longest. I would say that, initially, perhaps they did remain loyal, but then many found it appealing to be independent rulers. So, even if they often professed loyalty in words, they tried not to return to that era. Because a unified world state is beneficial for the people but not for the authorities. The more states, the more authorities, the more sinecures, the more officials, the more cushy jobs. The more states, the more places for independent rulers who are not dependent on anyone. What's wrong with that? Therefore, the collapse of the empire hit the people hard. It was a terrible disaster. But for the ruling class, it was new opportunities that they immediately wanted to seize. Even those states that outwardly professed loyalty, like Turkey or Persia, and did not change their traditions, did not help in critical situations when they could have.
A question from Pavel Sikov. Can the new chronology somehow explain information about floods supposedly occurring in the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries? Are these events connected to the collapse of the empire and the events of the world's redistribution at the same time?
We have no information about floods in the 16th, 17th, or 18th centuries. We are well aware that such discussions circulate, but we have never seen any serious justification. In my opinion, it's all nonsense.
Pavel further clarifies that buildings up to 4 stories are buried in the ground. Doesn't this indicate floods?
No, it doesn't. Don't be too gullible. There is a lot of nonsense circulating now, including stories about floods. You need to understand that if there was a flood, well, there were floods in St. Petersburg, floods in some places. But a flood of the scale being discussed could not go unnoticed in historical sources. It is already a period well covered by numerous sources, especially if we are talking about the 17th, 18th, 19th centuries. 4 stories buried underground? So what? How many buildings are there around? Where are the memories of this flood? Where are some deposits, geological evidence? This is not an event that can pass unnoticed. It should be sticking out from every corner. Geologists should see it. Everyone should see it. It should be in people's memories. And what they come up with about this flood is probably just to distract people from something serious, to engage them in nonsense. Don't pay attention to this nonsense.
This is my question. How is Aeneas related by blood to Isaac Komnenos, the father of Jesus, or other people we know? What about Manuel Komnenos? Where does he fit in? Is he a cousin, a distant cousin, or a blood relative?
We can only rely on what sources convey to us. The Gospel states that Aeneas was called the named son of the Virgin Mary. This implies that he was not a blood brother of Christ. Otherwise, there would be no need to refer to him as the named son. However, we see and understand that he was a representative of the royal lineage. King Aeneas was beloved by the gods, a king, not an ordinary person. So, he was a representative of the royal lineage, close to Christ, standing beside Christ, a Christian but fighting on the side of Christ's opponents for the reasons I have already explained to you. He is depicted as the son. I told you about the Bible, where there is patriarch Jacob and his 12 sons. One of them is Joseph. If we literally understand all this, then Jacob is the brother of the Lord, and accordingly, Joseph, the son of Jacob, is his nephew. This is if you take it literally. Understand that all these descriptions are quite generalized. Brother, son, these are all generalized understandings. Simply a relative is still a brother. That's how they could have called him. So, it's not necessary to interpret it literally. If you take it literally, then yes, a nephew. But we cannot assert that this should be taken literally.
The second question I wanted to ask. You have read a lot. Can you somehow estimate the number of those who fought in the Trojan War of 1204?
You must understand that the number of those who fought then could not have been large. In general, the number of combatants was not large until the 17th century. The number of combatants became large only in the 17th century. How was this ancient empire organized? How were the states created by this family, which created our civilization, organized? Our civilization was created by one family, this sacred family. And they established a world order. Many features of this order persisted until the beginning of the 17th century. Not all, of course, but many. And one of these features was the division of people into guilds, into some estates, each of which was engaged in its own business. The military in this state occupied a certain niche. They fought. The ruler relied on them, and the population fed them. Like other people, they also worked. That is, military service was considered a job. Not like today when you serve your homeland and should do it for free. No. Understand that it was not organized that way. A person plowed the land, and he did not plow it for the homeland. Of course, he obeyed the king. He had to faithfully perform his duties. But for this, he had to receive some agreed-upon payment. The payment that was accepted. A builder received payment for construction, and a soldier received payment for fighting. People did not fight for free, just as they did not work for free. Unless he was a slave who had to work because he was a slave, an unfree person. Free people did not work for free. This order persisted until the beginning of the 17th century. The monetary system was actually structured this way. Initially, it was created specifically to support the military because they needed to be somehow fed. They did not produce things themselves. Merchants did not exist yet. These were ancient times. There were no roads. Merchants appeared when roads were built. And the military had to somehow receive their pay. How? They could receive it in kind, but ancient rulers, probably even in Egypt, found a much more convenient way. They found a way to pay with gold. That is, they told the population that they could pay taxes not in grain but in gold. Where would you get it? Sell grain to the military, and they will pay you in gold. And the military received gold from the king. That is, they took gold and started distributing it to the troops instead of food. And the troops used it to buy food, which was sold to them because with this money they could pay taxes. That's how this monetary system got started. It got started specifically to keep the military going. And it always served the military. Until the end of the 16th century, it was not independent like today. It was used by the ruling powers to support the military. In other words, money was paid to the troops. The troops fought for this money. With this money, they could buy anything. But mostly they drank it away and squandered it because they were unmarried men. Accordingly, this money was collected again, returned to the treasury, and circulated within the state. There was such a circulation of money. When the empire collapsed in the 17th century, the main money was hidden. And at that time, money was only gold and silver. In other words, money was the weight of gold and silver. It wasn't some kind of coins. Coins could be minted. But it was just a stamped piece of gold or silver that the minting process certified its weight, nothing more. That's why all the money was crooked and uneven. The concept of nice-looking money did not exist. And there was no paper money. Even a golden dish was the same kind of money. It cost as much as it weighed. And minting was free. There were no minting houses. Actually, there were some, but minting was both state and private. People got a license and minted gold and silver, producing coins. But in the 17th century, coiners began to be sought and killed. It was a whole hereditary craft. They didn't understand. How come? Why should only the state be able to make money? What's the point? When the empire collapsed, the main treasury reserves were hidden and did not fall into the hands of the rebels. That's the thing. Why did the rebels create a false history for themselves? To depict themselves in this history as legitimate, hereditary, independent rulers of the places where they ruled. That was their common goal. Despite their warfare, they quickly came to an agreement on this. After all, they were all from the same state. They all knew each other. When the Soviet Union collapsed, several states were formed. But in the Politburo, all those leaders sat on the same bench together. They always communicated among themselves and continued to do so. It was approximately the same back then, to roughly compare it with the present. And when there was no money to pay the armies, that's when they drove the people onto the battlefield. This happened in the 17th century. They invented conscription, invented the formation, invented that you had to fight for the motherland. And they drove the people onto the battlefield. What did Napoleon say? The need for mercenary armies disappeared as soon as the peoples themselves took to the battlefields. Nations went to the battlefields in the 17th century. That's when these huge masses of people appeared, grinding each other on the battlefields. The population, simple peasants, ordinary people, craftsmen were forced, in times of war, to go out and fight. During the time of the empire, this never happened. A certain number of people fought professionally. They were taken at a young age. They fought, then either died, or went to monasteries, or made their way, rose to high ranks, and became princes. They did fight, but ordinary people did not. Therefore, their number was always quite limited. Of course, when certain special world conquests were required in the 14th century, the war machine was mobilized for specific purposes. It was mobilized, and, accordingly, a huge number of people were involved in military affairs to achieve the goal of conquering the world. After that, everything declined. They were scattered in monasteries, waiting for them to grow old. It was also a complex task to retire a large number of military personnel to allow them to peacefully grow old. rather than having a rebellion flare up among them, killing each other. That's why all ancient clashes, all medieval wars were quite low-scale conflicts.
How many? 5,000, 1,000, 100 people, 20,000 people?
I cannot specify a number unequivocally. I think in the thousands.
For example, traditional history tells us that in 1204 there were 20,000 Crusaders, plus Byzantines.
I think that's an inflated figure.
Supposedly, there were 400,000 people living in Constantinople.
I think the numbers were exaggerated. Again, how many lived there doesn't matter. What matters is not how many lived there, but how many were military personnel. Ordinary people did not fight.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for participating in the webinar.